Like Jenna said, this is component-based web design part 2. We're going to be looking at advanced techniques in Figma for creating powerful design systems. At Aten, we use Figma for everything we design. We've used other tools in the past, but today Figma is king, and it is the most collaborative, efficient, inclusive tool that we can have. It's really powerful. It has a huge amount of community support. So if you need a plugin for something like looking for a logo, there are plugins for that. There are plugins for checking contrast. There are files you can download and look at and see how other people are building things. Figma is just it's a fantastic tool and resource for learning about design and approaching design. With all that said, before I get too far into the talk, I wanted to ask, Jenna has a poll. What kind of experience do you all have with Figma? I'd really like to know so that as I'm going, I can speak to the people that are here. I'd really love to hear what you got. We'll give that poll a couple seconds to go for a bit. When I started designing for the web, I started in Photoshop and Dreamweaver, and that was really fun. It was a pretty rough time. A lot of layers and bitmaps and slicing, and I think I used that for the majority of my career until Sketch came out, and then Sketch was just this kind of groundbreaking tool. And then, of course, Figma came along soon after that, and they captured those aspects that were missing from Sketch, being able to collaborate, being able to share prototypes, things like that. And it's just continued to evolve and grow. So really exciting to be using Figma. All right, so kind of a mix. Some people never used it. That's fine. I'm going to try to, go through things, one step at a time. But as I'm going, feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll try to see them as I'm going, and I can answer them. Some people are kind of just beginning using Figma. It's a huge tool. There's a lot of different aspects to it. So even I learn new things all the time. So I'll try to kind of sprinkle in some tips and things as I'm going. And then some people have used it for a while. That's great. If there's anything you see me doing and you're like, hey, I know a better way to do that, let me know. I'd love to hear it. I like to learn and grow and make sure I'm doing things the right way. So with all that said, let's dive in. All right, so the other part 1 webinar, we covered building a button, making the button a little more flexible, and building an advanced card component. Some of those techniques will carry through into what we're looking at today. But if you want to go back and review, you can always watch that. That's up on our website. Just to go to aten.io/webinars, and you can find it there. So today we're going to be talking about 3 major topics. The first is variables and how Figma handles variables. The next is file structure, in particular, how to structure your files in a way that others can browse them and find what they're looking for. And then finally, I'm going to build some kind of common components and start to put some pieces together to show you how you can, over time, build a toolkit that can become your design system. All right. So to start, let's start by talking about variables. So in design systems, there's this concept of tokens, and tokens are a method for managing design properties and values across the design system. So in Figma, tokens are represented as variables. That's an important thing to keep in mind, but the words are somewhat interchangeable. Variables are kind of a term used in a lot of different ways. In this case, it's just basically a label that represents a thing. That's all you need to know. So when I approach variables, I typically have a pretty simple kind of 3-tiered structure, and this is pretty standard for design systems. There are primitive tokens. Those are going to be your kind of your base level, like colors, typography, things like that. Next up, we've got semantic. Those are variables that have some context to how they should be used. And then we have component specific, and those are ones that relate directly to a very specific element or component of the design system. And if you kind of think about it like a what, a how, and where, you know, what are the variables or what are the values? How are they used? And where are they used? That can kind of help you frame, you know, is this a semantic variable, or is this a primitive? Is this a component specific variable? That kind of framing can help you figure that stuff out. So primitives, like I mentioned, they include all the properties and values that exist in the design system. So things like colors, padding, margins, if you have border radius values that you want to use consistently throughout the design system, animation, maybe you have animation timing, or you have animation values that you want to keep consistent. Those can all be stored as primitive values. Semantic tokens, they give context to how a token should be used. So things like surface or background, the brand colors, maybe primary or secondary, warning, error. Basically, all of these labels tell you how these variables should be used. So if I want to have a button that's that brand color, I want to use that value there. And then component specific. So these are semantic token. Oops, that text is wrong there. Ignore that. These are, of course, variables that are specific to an element. So, for example, if you have a button and you have button text, so you might have button text color as one of those. You might have button background. You might have button background hover, things like that, that kind of are used specifically in that one instance. All right. Before we get into file structure, I did want to show you just a little bit about the variable interface in Figma. So Figma, the variable system in Figma is fairly new. And because of that, I think it has some things that it's struggling with and things that are really great about it. So what they've done already is a huge improvement over not having variables. Before variables, they had styles. So you would have a list of styles that existed within your file. So those styles could include colors, they could include type sizes, and which typeface is being used, things like that. Now, a lot of that is wrapped into variables. And so if I go over here with nothing selected, I can choose this local variables toggle, and that'll open up this panel here. So looking at this panel, this is where you can find all of the variables used in this file. Now, I've created a couple different structured collections, is what they call them. So I've got colors, primitive, colors, semantic, radius, semantic, spacing, semantic. So those are different ways for me to say, like, I need to edit my semantic colors. So here I've got surface primary, I've got text primary and secondary. You can see also that there are different modes. So the first column is always going to be the name, and then the second column and any beyond that are the mode. Now, if I look back here at the primitive values, they just have one value. Primitives, you should always keep them as a one-to-one relationship. You don't want to say, white is white on a light background and black on a dark background, because then it doesn't make any sense anymore, right? That's where you want to keep things really simple. So if I go back to the semantic, now you can see I've got, let's look at text primary. So the primary text color is going to be this gray 900. So that's like a really dark gray. And that's on light backgrounds. Okay, that makes sense. And then this other mode is dark. Okay, so in that case, I don't want that color to be that same dark color. I want it to be a lighter version. So it's going to be gray 100, which is a much lighter color, and it'll give the right contrast on that background. Okay, and then, things like radius. So here's where we can have modes really kind of kick in and do some really interesting things. So let's say I have radius small, right? Maybe I only have one radius. It could just say radius default. I could name it that. What you name them is basically up to you. But my modes for this are desktop large, desktop, tablet, and mobile. So I have 4 different modes, and those are the screen sizes I'm designing for. Now, what that lets me do is I can take a frame that's kind of wrapping around everything that I'm designing. And I can say, this is a desktop large. And then anytime I use this radius value, it'll pull in the correct number. If I then change that later to tablet, so I'm making a new design, it's tablet, it'll use that other number. So really powerful. It means I don't have to remember, oh, what was my radius on this file? Was it 5 or 4? I thought I had at one point it was 6, but then I changed it, so now I can't remember. It's all done for you. All you have to remember is, I want to use radius small for this element. Boom, it's all set, and you only have to change it to one place if you make any changes. And then spacing, you can do similar things here. So in this case, I haven't entered any values, but you can. And another cool thing, and I haven't done this on this one, you can reference other variables within here. And that's what's happening in semantics. So here I'm referencing other color values here. But for spacing, let's say I wanted it to be 64 on desktop large, maybe it's 48 on desktop, 32 on tablet, and maybe 24 on mobile. And then later on, we can try using that and see how that looks. Anybody have any questions about this variables interface? I did want to say, before I get too far, the thing that I feel is most lacking right now is typography. So type is really complicated. They haven't implemented type into this yet. I think they're trying right now, and I think there's a conference that happens every year. It's called Config, and it's, I think, in June. And that's typically where they announce some new features. I think they're waiting for that to announce that feature. But basically what that would mean is I could set up responsive type styles in this panel. And then it would be super easy to use those styles throughout my design, change things, with just changing that one mode from, say, desktop large to tablet. All my type would update, all of that would change. Right now, that's not in there. So that, I think, is a huge feature that I think is missing, but they're working on it. It's coming soon. All right. So let's talk about file structure. So at Aten, we, of course, are a full-service agency. We work with strategists, designers, and developers. And, like I mentioned earlier, we've used a number of tools. The thing I like about Figma is that it lets us kind of customize how we approach what we're building. So we don't have to follow some arbitrary system that the tool defines. We get to define it ourselves. So in Figma, there is a concept of pages. And you can see that over here. If I go back to this kind of test project, they list them here as pages. You can add more, that kind of thing. But basically, a page is a canvas where you can organize your frames, your groups, your layers, basically anything you're designing. And your file can include, I think, just about any number of pages. You might get to a point where the file starts to get kind of slow, and that's where you might have gone a little too far. But for the most part, I haven't gotten there yet recently, so not a huge deal to worry about that. Lots of flexibility in there. So the page structure that we've landed on is something like this. So we start with base, then elements, then components, then layouts, and then pages. Now, these kind of 5 tiers are mostly just guidelines, and this will help. It'll help designers and developers kind of speak the same language. And by that, I mean, these map kind of directly to what our developers will be doing in the browser. So if I look at going from Figma into code, they actually have folders within whatever theme they're building, within their CSS and file structure, that map to these same pages in Figma. That means that if they're working on, say, base elements, like that could be like an H1 or an H2, they know to look at this elements page to find those values. And then they map directly to what they're doing. So it makes it very easy for them to get in there and explore. Now, I'm going to show you real quick. So that's what that looks like in Figma. I have some icons in there. Those are just icons that kind of pop up when you bring up this character viewer thing. I don't know if you all can see this. It might not be screen shared, but you can enter any kind of icon you want. You can do colored icons. You can do different shapes, things like that. I also have some kind of empty pages that I'm using as kind of horizontal lines to break up the content. I have an archive page. We find that that's actually pretty handy to have because sometimes you're designing something and it doesn't quite make the cut, but you're not ready to let it go because you think, well, maybe this is something I can pull from later. You can move it into the archive. And then we have, some kind of documentation assets. So these are just some of those things that we're using to kind of label the design as we're going. But for the most part, these 5 pages here are the ones that kind of have all of that structure that we're talking about. So the base page includes basically a visual representation of all variables and styles in the design system. It can include information about fonts used and where they can be found. So like, let's say I'm using a font that's maybe it's from, just Google Fonts, for example. I can note that there so that the developer knows, oh, I can just get this from Google Fonts. I don't have to request access or find some access key to connect up with the font service that the client has subscribed to, things like that. So basically trying to make sure that all of that's captured there. But thinking about this, basically this maps to those token values, all those base values that kind of live on that one-to-one relationship. We want to capture those there. The elements page, these are any basic components that do not include other elements. So when you think about it, like, and if you had a list of every HTML element that is just, an H1, a paragraph, whatever, all of those things, that would live on this page. There's a little nuance here. Often a button might have an icon, which maybe an icon is considered a component. That's a bit of a gray area. It isn't really worth kind of getting into that argument about where a button should live in all of this. But, for the most part, if we keep it consistent, then developers will know where to look. All right, then we have components. So a component can be a collection of elements or other components that are grouped together to make a new component. So Figma's, like I said, very flexible. So this could be something like a navigation menu, callouts that might include some text and a button and an image, site headers where you've got logo, maybe primary navigation. You might have secondary navigation, utility navigation. Maybe you've got a search interface in there, something like that. Teasers, so like anytime you have text or anytime you have content that's shown in a list, maybe it's a list of recent news items. Those would be teasers. If it's cards, things like that. All of those would be considered components, and you'd want to build them on this page. All right, and then we have layouts. So layouts is kind of an abstraction, but they are visual representations of each of the different page structures in the design system. And how those adapt to different screen sizes. I'll get into showing what that looks like in just a minute. And then pages. So pages are combinations of components and elements, and they use layouts to organize those items. So a page can include multiple layouts. So for example, let's say you have a page that has maybe a column of content with a sidebar. So maybe the column of content is a series of elements, so headings, paragraphs, things like that. The sidebar with its, maybe it's a sidebar navigation, that might be a component. The way those are arranged is a layout. So we could say this page uses the 2/3, 1/3 layout to create this structure. Okay, a page can also include multiple layouts. So you might have, you might have that up at the top where you've got the 2/3, 1/3 layout with a sidebar. And then below that, you might have a full width layout that lists kind of, 3 related news articles, something like that. Okay. I did want to talk briefly about Storybook. So we've been using Storybook on projects recently, and it is an incredibly powerful tool. And basically, it's a tool that lets you build the individual elements and components in the abstract from whatever CMS you're using. So in our case, we do a lot of work with Drupal. We do a lot of work with WordPress. But with using Storybook, it means that our front-end developers can start building out this design system before the site's built. And that's a huge kind of leapfrog for them to be able to get ahead on their work. Before, they would have to wait until a developer was able to kind of build out some of the site and get it ready for them before they could do this work. Now they can start right away and get right in there with Storybook. And it lets you browse all of those different elements and components and see what they look like when put together in the browser. Now, there are tools for connecting Storybook and Figma. From what I've found, we haven't done this yet, but from what I found, there is a tool that's kind of a middleman. It's called Chromatic. You do need to have a subscription to that to connect them. Basically, what it lets you do is within Figma, you can see what the component looks like in Storybook alongside what you're seeing in Figma. So it's a really great way to kind of check the work kind of live within the tool. All right, let's take a look at some of those pages here. Let me pull this over here. So I have a test file that I've been working on, just some general structural things. So right now I'm on the base page. So in here I've got colors, I've got type. I've just started to kind of put in some type examples in here. I can have spacing, things like that. But basically, I'm using all these documentation components to give that structure. And then within those areas, I have all the different those tokens represented. So in this case, I have the primitive colors. And then if you go up to elements, I might have text. So like in this case, this is just plain, let's say, this is body text. So in this design system that I was building, I have a default font size across desktop large, desktop, tablet, phone in this case, and then maybe buttons and links. So here I've got a primary button, a secondary button, things like that. Then components. So this is where we start to get into like a header component. Again, this was just kind of a work in progress. And then layout. So this is the one that I really wanted to spend a little time looking at. A layout, like I mentioned, is not a designed thing so much as a representation of how a design should use a structure. So in this case, if I have a one-column layout, I can look at this and see, okay, on desktop large, which is currently 1728 wide, the content column is 1472 wide. That's great. I need to know that. And then the margins on the left and right of that are 128. And then if I show the grid that's underlying all of that, you can start to see, I've got a 12-column grid, and it's using this kind of 64 pixel square unit that is kind of consistent across all of it. And that means that, this is using 2 of those units for spacing on the edge. And so we can convert all of that to percentages and make things really responsive. And then that one column, I can take it over here to another version for the desktop, and then onward to tablet and on the phone. And you can see too, the number of columns on this one isn't changed. It's just a little tighter. But on this one, we're now down to 4 columns. So on this tablet version, we want to make sure that the layout works a little bit differently. So it needs to adapt to this kind of 4-column structure. And then on the phone, we're giving ourselves 2 columns. For the most part, content's going to fit into a 1-column structure, but that's just showing you some of that example. Now, here's what that 2-column looks like, where you've got like that content with a sidebar. Again, bringing that over to desktop, tablet, maybe the sidebar drops below. And then on mobile, of course, it naturally has to stack. So here, here's kind of a complex layout, and I'll turn those grids off. So here we've got 1 column, 2 column, 1 column, right? So it's using those same patterns, just kind of collecting them all into one complex layout. And then, you might have a list view, and those list views are going to have different layouts that they'll use. So in this case, maybe you've got a card view where you're pulling up cards like this. So it's a 3-column card view where the cards are all the same height. There might be filters at the top. On a desktop, it goes to 2 columns. Tablet, it's down to 1 column, and same on the phone. But basically, all of this can be then used by the pages that you're designing to say, this section of my page is using this layout. And that'll make developers only have to implement a layout one time, and then they'll just know, okay, this is where that consistency is. All right, so let's build some common components. So we're going to start by looking at variables to use in the design system. I kind of got ahead a little bit and set some things up. It was a bit of what I was showing you earlier, but basically trying to make sure that I had a robust enough library of colors to pull from that we could actually design something. One of the cool features with this panel is I can select a color and I can choose edit variable, and then I can do color scoping. So that means I can control how these colors are used. And that means like, I don't want this color to be available for a stroke or for effects or for a fill, that kind of thing. So that's something you can play with if you're getting in there and trying out variables, but it lets you kind of scope and limit how colors can be used. So that's another way to kind of enforce that structure or that control that you're trying to enforce. All right, so I've got these primitive colors. I have the semantic colors, and in this case, I have the surface and text. So surface is just generally like a background, something like that. I have radius, like I mentioned earlier, and then I have the padding, so medium padding. So let's close this. You can see in this file, I pulled in these colors to show the visual representation of them, just so you get an eye for what things look like. I'm also including the color contrast for each of these colors. So in this case, white on that color is a 15.7. The standard you want to aim for is a 4.5 for large text, and for small text, and a 3.0 for large text. So in this case, this color combination is great, and then you can see some of them get a little trickier. So this is a 3.5. You can't really use that for small text. You got to be careful there. Same with these blues, but basically trying to show here are these colors that we're using in the design system. Now, over here, I've laid out some of those semantic colors. So I've got brand primary, brand secondary dark. So that's like the dark version. Text primary dark, surface primary dark, things like that. And then just a few, like in case we want to have like a status message, so success, warning, error. Again, this is a really flexible approach. You can have whatever variables or whatever semantic tokens make the most sense to your design system. There is no kind of list of what you have to have. It's a little bit flexible. So just kind of think about that as you're structuring your design system. And then I don't have any typography, but let's not sweat that for now. All right, so we're going to start by building some simple components. So I'm going to go over to my elements page. In this case, I'll just delete that. I'm going to add some text. That's very small. All right, so I'm currently working with Inter, and I want to make a paragraph component or a body component. Let's call it that. So my body font size I want to be 18. Line height currently is 24. That all seems good. Let's see, the paragraph spacing I'm going to also set to 24. And now I'm going to make this a component. Okay, so text. Great. I'm going to rename this body. And there we go. So now if I make this and I drag it over here, pretty straightforward, but if I say test, now you can see testing. Oh, there's something kind of weird going on. This is where I typically have auto layout working, so I'll turn on auto layout for that element. Now you can see the frame fits right around that text. There are other approaches. So for this one, I'm going to say, let's set it like this. I want the text to be left aligned, and and I'm going to set the text to fill that area. So now we've got this body text component set up. This is now the same. Let's see if I'm going to use one of my favorite plugins. Let's see. It's called Lorem Ipsum. I'm going to do paragraphs, and I'll do 2. Okay. So that's what our body text looks like. So I don't want our body text to be bold, so I'm going to set it to regular. Okay, so that auto updated. And currently, this is 297 wide. Let's set it to 960. That's a more kind of standard approach, and I'm going to do the same on this one. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe a little long. Maybe I'll set it to 720 for now, just to keep it a little more readable. Okay, so now I've got this text component. Now I'm gonna just wrap this, and on a Mac it's Command Option G, and that wraps it in a frame. And a frame lets you do some interesting things. Once it's wrapped in a frame, I can give that frame auto layout, and then I'm going to start to use some of those variables that we set up earlier. So I'm going to give it that surface of primary, and I'm going to give it the padding medium on left and right and top and bottom. Okay, and let's see. Oh, one thing I do want to set up is text should have the color text primary. Okay, so now I've got this component for text, and I've got a representation of it here. Now, one really great thing is I can change this now to be dark, and you can see it automatically updated to use those dark values for those variables. So that's where those variables come in and are really powerful. I can also set it to tablet. That changed that spacing value that I entered here to 32 instead of, it was, I think, 64 before. Now, the only catch with that is that the text did not change. So let's fix that. So I'm actually going to shrink that down. So now I've got this component for body text. All of this could go away if they implemented variables for text, but this is the way that I've been approaching text in Figma, and I think it works given the current state of things, and it makes for some very flexible approaches. So I'm going to click on this plus here for properties and add a variant. Pretty straightforward. So variants let you change the aspects of the component. In this case, I've got, this is the size component. So size is default. And then I'm going to actually add, let's see, I'm going to add a variant for screen. So now this one is set to size default, screen desktop large. Oops, let me make sure that's got the capital L. Okay, and now I'm going to make another one. Oh, that doesn't look good. I'm going to add an auto layout here. Auto layout just makes everything easier because now when I duplicate this, hitting Command D, now I can change this element on its own. So now in this case, you know what, I'm going to make desktop large. We'll make that 20 point and 32 for the line height and spacing. This one's going to be, let's see, we'll do 18. Yeah, we'll keep that one there. So this is desktop. And then tablet, in this case, I'm going to set it to 16 and 20 and, oops, and 20. And then I'm going to make one more copy and set this to mobile, which is what this file is set to use. And this one I'll do 14, and I'll just keep it at 20. At that point, I don't want to go much smaller than that. So now, as we look at this, I have this component in here, but it's still set to desktop large. And that's where these features can come in handy. So if I select that component, you'll notice this says desktop large, so I could change it if I wanted to, but I don't want to do that. I want that to happen automatically based on the context. The colors are doing that, but the component itself won't do it unless you assign a value to this screen. So if I look at this, I can see, oh, I don't have a value for that yet. I don't have a value set up. So I'm going to open up my variables. I'm going to go to spacing, and then I'm going to add a new variable. And this one's going to be a string. Okay, and this is going to be called screen. So this may look a little kind of redundant, but you'll get it in just a second. So on desktop large, the value is desktop large. On desktop, it's set to desktop. On tablet, it's set to tablet. On mobile, mobile. Okay, got that set up. Now let's see what we can do here. So if I select this component and I hover over this, I want to set this to screen. Boom, it automatically updated. So now, as I change this to mobile, tablet, desktop, desktop large, you can see this component is now a responsive, flexible component that'll adapt to the modes that are assigned to this frame. Change it back to light and all of those things. Let me quickly change all of this. Okay, so we've got a text component. That's one thing. Let's make a heading, and I'm just going to duplicate this one. So I held down Option and dragged it, and I'm going to call this heading, and I'm going to select all of these and call them H1. Let's do that. Now the text inside, I want them all to be bold for my headings. And now I'll go in there and start updating the size. So let's say, you know what, here, I'll put one of these in here. Then we can see it as it's working. Set this to fill as well. All right, so let's say on desktop large, I want my heading to be 64, and the line height, maybe we'll also do 64 for that. And let's see how that looks. It looks pretty tight. One thing that's always good to test with line heights is, you know, how do the lines, when text wraps, how close are they? And I think in this case, they might be, I'm gonna apply a variable here. I'll do the same spacing there. They might be okay. They look like they might be a little tight. So let's go up and we can change this one we'll change it to 72. 72, there we go. Okay, that gives it a little bit more breathing room. But for now, we'll just set that to heading. Okay, so 64, 72, maybe now it's 48, 64. This is now tablet. We'll go to 40 and we'll set it to 48. And then finally for mobile, maybe it's 36, 40. We'll see how all that looks. Let's move these out of the way. Okay, so now we've got a heading, we've got a body. I'm going to set it to desktop, tablet, mobile. Did you notice something? The heading didn't change, right? It's because I didn't connect up this variable yet. Let's do that. Okay, now as I change these, they'll change instantly. I don't like how much space there is here. Right now, that padding that's around the page, I think is fine, but the space between the heading and the text, that feels too loose to me. So I want to make a new variable. I'm going to go here to my padding variable. I'm going to select this one and duplicate it. I'll call this one small. And I'm just going to have all of these values. And again, if you have any questions as I'm going, feel free to jump in. If there's something you'd want me to see or you want me to kind of talk a little bit more about, feel free to jump right in. The chat is open. Okay, so now I'm going to set it to small, and now that looks a lot better. So now as I change things, that space gets tighter. Things feel pretty good. Okay. All right, so looking pretty good here. We've got a heading and some text. Let's build a button, okay? And for our button, we are going to use, let's use our body text. Let's try this out. We'll see if this works. I'm going to actually change this so that the text and the wrapper are tight on it. Ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. It dragged it right out of there. Come on, Figma. All right, I'm going to do it this way. All right, so again, we're going to tighten that up so that it wraps to the length of the text. I'm going to hug that. Ooh, that's a great question. How do the styles you're creating get translated into CSS? Well, that's one of the beauties of Figma. So let's take a pause on building this button real quick, and I'm just going to show you. Let's say I'm a developer and I'm looking at this desktop large design, and maybe for me, I actually have desktop large, desktop. I have tablet. Maybe the sizes are actually proportionate to what they would be. Oops. And then I have a mobile version. So typically a design system like this, maybe we'll set this to like 390 just to give you a rough idea. So a design system like this might have a representation of all of these different elements across those page sizes. Now for a developer, Figma has a feature called Dev Mode, and you'll see it up in the top here. Dev Mode is a subscription that you have to pay for to get access to it. If you don't have Dev Mode, you get similar features, but they're a little more limited. So in our case, if I turn on Dev Mode, you'll start to see things a little bit differently. I'm going to shrink this up a little. So now as I'm kind of moving around, I can see, oh, this is a component. Let me select that component. Okay, so this is that text component. It has a size, it has a screen, and that's basically all that can be changed. What if I open it in this thing called the playground? Now I can say, okay, in this case, oh, well, the size is just H1. That's just because I haven't set up other sizes, but we could. The screen, if I break that from it, I can change. Okay, so this is what it looks like across screen sizes. This is just to let me play with it and see, what does it look like, if this thing changes in certain ways. So sometimes that's helpful for seeing, maybe there's a component that has an optional element that could be shown or hidden. A developer could kind of play with that to get a feel for it. So in this case, as a developer, I'm looking at a couple different things. So let's say I've got this frame selected. I can look at the CSS for this frame, and it has a lot of interesting stuff in there. So it's set to display flex. It has a width. The padding is set to a variable. And in Figma's case, it shows you it's set to padding medium. And then it has 64 pixels for the actual value. So it's telling you all of that stuff so you can kind of sync that up. You can copy this and copy all of it. The flex direction is column, so that means it's going from top to bottom. I align items to the flex start, so that's aligning them to the left side. The gap is that smaller value. This is how developers can get access to all of that information. So it's, again, that kind of storybook, like plugin experience, that's one way that you can kind of start to sync things up. But for our purposes, we're just using these values straight out of Figma. And I can do that for any of this. So in this case, I have this type selected. So now that the color of the type is text primary, I can see the color value. I can see the font family, font size, font style, the weight, the line height, which it also translates to a percentage if you want to get that value. So it tries to give you everything you might need to be able to recreate this in the browser. All right. Tim, does that answer your question? Feel free to chime in if you want more context. Oh yeah, yes, totally. Plugins can export the tokens to JSON if needed. So I was actually looking, I have a Figma variables to JSON plugin. So if I fire this up, you can see it brings up this panel. There are a lot of different plugins that'll do this kind of thing, but basically this one will give you all of this content. You can choose which collections you want to export and all of that, and it'll show all those values and export them in a way that developers can get in there and access exactly what's being used in the file. All right, we're getting close on time. Let's go back to this button component because I want to make sure that we touch on this because I think buttons are a pretty common design element. Okay, so I've got this body. I want to wrap this. So again, I'm going to wrap it in a frame, Command Option G. You can go frame selection under Object in the menu if you want to do that. But I want this, okay, so this is the button. I want this to be flexible. I'm going to call it button. And then I'm going to give it some auto layout, and I'm just going to manually enter some values for the padding. The radius, I'm going to set that to radius small. And then I want to have a background color for this. So currently, I don't have any of those contextual variables set up. So let's do that. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add, I'm going to create a new collection. So create collection, and this one's going to be called colors. Figma does this cool thing where if you type minus and then a caret, it converts it to an arrow. And I like the way that reads. So this is colors components, we'll call it, just to keep it easy to read. And then I'm going to add a new color variable. And for these, I'm going to have light and dark. And I'm going to call this button slash background primary. So that slash, you'll see as soon as I hit enter what that does. It automatically created a group. Now you can also select something and say new group with selection, but basically it just makes it a little easier to browse these things in here. So let's look at this one again. I want to change the values. So in this case, I'm going to set it to, I'm going to set the background color to, we'll say 700 on a light background, and on a dark background, it's going to be, we'll do 400. We'll try that out. You know what, maybe 300. Okay, so now I've got button background primary. Let's do another one. Button text primary. In this case, it's going to be white, but again, we want to use variables. That way, if our value for white changes, we can update that. For example, in this file, I have this gray 1000, which looks like black. It's not quite black. It's a different version. So now I've got a background and a text color. So let's go, let's check this out. So in this case, I want to change this to use those values, which ended up down here. I'm going to set that to the button text primary, and I'm going to set this fill to background primary. All right, we got a button. Now I want to make this actually more of a button. So let's see, I'm going to convert it to a component, Command Option K, or object, well, it's already a component, object, create component. And I want to add an icon to it. One plugin I really love for icons is called Iconify. And this is an icon library that pulls from all of these different icon libraries. So it's a really great tool for finding icons, and you can limit it. So like, let's say I want to just search within material symbols, arrow right. Sure, let's do that. I'm going to do, we'll try this one. I'll drag that in there. Okay. So I'm going to name this icon arrow right. And then I'm going to convert that to a component. Let's see. I'm going to put this, I'm going to put an instance of it into the button. Obviously that looks bad, so I want to change the way this is working. I want things to be center aligned. Let's see, in this case, I'm going to just set it to 8 pixels. And the color of this does not look good. So let's go back to our variables here. We're going to do a new color and button icon primary. Okay, and maybe in this case, the icon, we want it to be just like a little bit different from the white so that it kind of creates a nice kind of composition there. And maybe we can just reuse those same values. Let's see how that looks. So we're going to kind of do the inverse of the background. this case 700. Okay, so now if I come in here and I select this, I will set this to icon primary. Oh, that's pretty good. And now if I have an instance of this, why don't I drop this into this, this component here, and let's change it to dark, and didn't update. Well, oh, you know why? It's because this is using the colors component dark. There we go. Okay, so that looks okay. I might spend a little bit more time getting into making this look good. If I were really building this component out, I would build out different states for it. So again, to do that, I would just add variants. I'd put auto layout on there first thing just to make that super simple. And then I start duplicating this. So this is going to be hover, and then maybe focus, and then maybe disabled. And then within those, I could go in and create all those different variable combinations for all those different things. But you can start to see as you're building out these components and you're using those variable structures that we talked about, you're creating these systems that are really flexible and let you really quickly start to create this design system that'll adapt across different screen sizes.